Hey there, women of welcome. How are you? Good Friday morning to you. We are going to have a really important conversation, and if you missed the front end of it or if you miss any of this, we're going to put it in our newsletter for you to be able to view later and in length when you can. So if you're not signed up for our newsletter, get signed up at womenofwelcome.com, because today we're going to be talking about the attempted deportation of the 76 Guatemalan children over the holiday weekend. We're going to be talking with our friends at KIND, Kids in Need of Defense, and we're just kind of going to get the whole scoop of what happened this weekend. Why did this happen to unaccompanied children who are in the care of the U.S. government? So if you're unfamiliar, hopefully you've seen some of the stories about this. You've seen some of the various headlines, which is wonderful that it's gotten such varied coverage about this. I've got KIND coming in here in just a second. But over the holiday weekend, if you were not aware, 76 unaccompanied Guatemalan children that were being held in ORR shelters, Office of Refugee Resettlement Shelters, and sponsor homes and families. At 1 a.m. in the morning on Sunday morning over the holiday weekend, they were pulled from their beds. They were awoken and pulled from their beds. Hold on, I'm going to get KIND in here real quick. We're doing it. But these children were pulled from their beds and then they were taken to Harlingen, Texas, where they were loaded onto 3 deportation flights. Here we are. We are with Jen, Podcall with KIND, who's going to give us all the details about all this. Jen, I'm just giving them a little bit of the overview if folks missed news this weekend. So again, 76 unaccompanied Guatemalan children that are in the care of the U.S., whether that be in shelters or in sponsor homes or families, woken up at 1 a.m. in the morning, loaded onto 3 deportation planes in Harlingen, Texas. And 2 of those planes were being set for takeoff and then were halted by a judge's emergency temporary restraining order in that regard. One was already mid-air. We are going to be talking with Jen Podkul, who is the vice president over at Kids in Need of Defense, who has really all the information about this. And we're going to ask her kind of all of the easy and hard questions about what is going on. Why did this happen? In general, the administration is saying that the Guatemalan government had asked that these children be repatriated. And we're going to talk to Jen about why that seems to be a troubling request. And if that was truly a repatriation that was happening for these kids, why did it happen at 1 a.m. in the morning on a holiday weekend? Really in the middle of the night, waking these children out of their beds and in their homes and their caretakers. So right now, we currently in the U.S., have about 700 Guatemalan children that are in our custody and care that I'm aware of. Jen can correct me here if I'm wrong. And so we are going to start just with the very basics so that everyone has the right amount of context here, and then that we can hear really why was this necessary? Was it necessary? And what do we do now? And how can we help? So stick around. This is going to be about a 15, 20-minute conversation with all the details you need to know about what happened with these children this weekend. Jen, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Our community is anxious to know what to do when we see these headlines about what is going on with children who are in our care. Sometimes we're thinking, well, it's better that they go back home. It's better that they're not here. But we don't know the full story, and the story is important. The context is incredibly important. So we have done several of these kind of briefings with KIND. KIND is a trusted friend of Women of Welcome. And Jen, will you just tell us a little bit about what your role is at KIND, and then we'll dive into all the details.
Sure. Thanks, Bree. Thanks everyone for joining. We're always really grateful when people want to find out more and ask really tough questions about what's going on to get to the bottom of all the news stories that we all see going back and forth. KIND serves children on the move. So globally, we're serving children who feel like they're not safe where they are and are off crossing international borders in search of safety. We provide legal services, we provide lawyers to the kids, we provide social workers to the kids to make sure that they're safe at every moment of their journey, whether they end up staying in a new country or going back to their country of origin. And I manage our policy and advocacy work. So really thinking about how can governments do a better job making sure children are safe and making sure that they're where they need to be and that families can be together. And so, this is something I think that took us all by surprise. We were very alarmed when we were starting to hear reports that Guatemalan kids were going back. And it was very confusing to us because, we're serving these children in the role of being their lawyers. because there's a whole legal process, right? There's a whole system that's set up to get to the bottom of a child's story and figure out which kids really need safety here and which kids can safely return back to their countries of origin. And, Kind works not just in the United States helping kids here, but we run return and reintegration programming in Guatemala with several of our partners. So for kids for whom it is safe to go back, we work with them and work with their families to make sure that they can go back in a safe way, only after we've made sure that it truly is safe for them to go back. So, we were hearing people on the Guatemala side saying that government officials were knocking on people's doors saying, get ready for kids to come back. We heard officials going into the OR detention facilities here that hold children, starting to talk to them about going back. And our kind of spidey senses were up, very alarmed about what was going on, because these are kids who are in the middle of a process, right? A judge has not yet decided if it's appropriate to send that child back.
Right. Right. So I love the work that Kind does, and I think that we can all agree that it is incredibly important to have the full story and the full context. And it's not that anyone here on this conversation is saying, well, we just want to keep kids in U.S. care. We want to keep them here. Absolutely, if a child can return home. Again, it's reentry and repatriation. But again, we want to protect some of the most vulnerable, arguably the most vulnerable people who are on the move, including young and tender age children. So give us a little bit of a reminder. A lot of people throw out these terms like UAC and migrant children, unaccompanied children. Give us a little bit of terminology so that we can read the headlines better about what all of those kind of terms mean. And then we're going to get into what happened to these specific kids.
Sure. So the legal term is an unaccompanied alien child. So that means a child who arrives in the United States, is encountered by somebody in Homeland Security, and they're not with a parent or legal guardian, so no one to legally speak for them. And it's a child who does not already have pre-authorization to be in the United States. So they didn't get a visa ahead of time, or they didn't arrive already as an approved refugee, that they're coming here asking for help and asking for protection. So they're called a UAC. That matters because a deportation process starts immediately against them, right? If they're here and they don't have any authorization, even if they're asking for help, they start the deportation process, which allows a judge to decide, to kind of hear the story, get to the bottom of the story, and decide if the child should stay or leave. Now, some of these kids end up reuniting with family who are in the United States, waiting for them. Maybe they have parents in their country of origin. Maybe they don't. Maybe they're orphan children. But the reason why they're called unaccompanied is because in that moment when they're encountered by the government, they don't have an adult to speak for them. And legal processes are starting against them right away. Now, these kids who this happened to were in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Now, this is a health and human services program that's designed to house these children while they're going through their deportation process. Now, some of these kids might have someone safe that is willing to care for them in the United States while they go through the deportation process. So some kids are in ORR and the government screens this adult. It could be a parent, it could be a family friend, it could be a distant relative, it could be a grandparent who's caring for them. If that person's been approved and they're a safe person, the child could leave and be going to school and living in a home while they go through the deportation process. Some kids, traditionally it's been about 10% of the kids. I think right now it's a little higher, don't have anyone in the United States who's willing to care for them. So they live in these care programs run by the Office of Refugee Resettlement, long-term foster care or shelters while they're going through the process. And these were the kids that were subject to this experience this weekend.
Okay, so how many kids, some of us might be new to how kids are taken care of and why they are taken care of in the way that they are. We don't want to get too much into the nitty-gritty just because we want to get to the news that happened this weekend. But I do think it's important for context. Give us a little bit of the landscape. How many unaccompanied children are in the care of the Office of Refugee Resettlement? How many foreign born, how many unaccompanied kids are in the U.S. process right now for deportation?
Yeah, so I don't have the total number, but it's several hundred thousand kids who are in deportation proceedings right now. You've probably heard and seen news articles about the backlog in the immigration courts. They're not getting through the cases as quickly as they should be. So there's several hundred thousand kids in deportation proceedings in the United States. The vast majority of them are living with somebody while they go through this process. There are about 2,000 kids that are still in government custody right now. And like you said, approximately 600, 700 of them are from Guatemala.
Wow. Wow. So you have hundreds of thousands of children that that America is new to them and that they have made some kind of journey or process to get here for safety purposes or reunification purposes, and they're living amongst us with sponsor families or in some kind of hodgepodge foster care situation. And you're
Mm-hmm.
saying that there's several thousand that are in the custody of the government, 700 of which, that's like a large majority if you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
1,000 kids, 700 of which are Guatemalan children
Mm-hmm.
that we just tried to deport back to Guatemala in the middle of the night. So, okay, this just gives us a deeper context of what is happening, what is going on. Um, okay, tell us what happened this weekend. I mean, we're hearing, okay, this was at the Guatemalan government's request that we repatriate these 700 kids back to Guatemala. I mean, why wouldn't they want them back? I mean, who knows, right? You're going to
Mm-hmm.
tell us
Mm-hmm.
what you know about this from your legal perspective. And why wouldn't the government, our government, want to be in partnership with them? We don't want these kids just kind of sitting in care. What is that? Why was it so egregious? I mean, apart from just the fact that these kids were woken up in the middle of the night, no notice, and then taken to airports and planes, and how traumatic and stressful that would have been.
Mm-hmm.
Why even on the surface does this not pass the sniff test?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Look, like I said, at the end of the day, if the child had an opportunity to be screened and tell their story, and it is safe for them to go back and they have someone there who can care for them, in some cases it might be most appropriate for a child to go back. The important thing right here, though, is the process, right? We're an
Right.
orderly country. We're a country of laws. We have law enforcement, we have procedures.
Right.
These are children who are in the middle of a process. So this process, the laws that have been established for 30 years, 100 years, they were just completely circumnavigated. The government tried to do this weekend was say, actually forget about this whole legal process. We're just going to circumnavigate it, put some kids on the airplane, send them back. Now, what was really interesting to us was to hear that the US government claimed that this was at the behest of the Guatemalan government or at the behest of family members. We cannot speak to the veracity of, government agreements, between the conversations between the two governments. What we can say is, there's been reporting about families in country of origin very surprised and not wanting to have their child come back because they did not feel like they could keep them safe if they went back to Guatemala. We had children talking to my colleagues through tears saying, I am so scared to go back. I don't understand. I thought I was going to have the opportunity to talk to a judge. Why it's not safe for me to do it. I can't do it. I've heard of a child who's run away from a facility because they're so scared of what's going to happen to them next. The terror that was instilled in these kids this weekend is really unimaginable. I think it was so remarkable what lawyers were able to do for the kids and to get into court and to get a restraining order. At least the judge said, wait a minute, pause everybody, take those kids off the airplanes. Let's figure out what's going on here. Let's make sure that there's a process, there's a procedure, and everyone's following the laws that we have in this country for so many years. And all I could think about is this, first of all, the fear of the poor kid who was woken up in the middle of the night, told to pack your bags. Then they're sent and they're sitting on these airplanes. They were sitting on the tarmac for hours. I mean, I could not imagine all day as I was getting texts and messages and phone calls about what was going on. All I could think about is that poor kid sitting on a tarmac, not knowing what's going to happen and not knowing, am I going back to the shelter? Am I going back to the facility? and then those kids then being hauled off the plane. I mean, I think the judge made the right decision to say, I'm going to issue a restraining order, and we're not going to have these kids go until we can figure out what's really going on here and make sure that this is lawful.
Right.
And then some of the kids ended up going to different shelters. So these kids are going then to a new place with new kids and new staff working for them. And
No.
so, when we talk about Guatemalan kids, many of them are indigenous language speakers, right? Many of them might not even speak Spanish, let alone English. So who is communicating with them? Who is explaining to them what was going on? I think, this really just offends people's sensibility of, one, how you treat a child, and two, that this is a country of laws. We need to follow procedures and laws. There are processes for making these decisions, and we want to make sure that they're followed.
I mean, I think that's something that I didn't catch in any of the reporting, was that some of these kids did not go back to their original places that they were being cared for. And I don't know, I don't care what age you are. If you have a child in your life and they're woken up in the middle of the night, it's disorienting in general. But then to pack your stuff, you're leaving, and then to sit on a tarmac in a plane. And one of those three planes had been taken off and was rerouted midair. So to come back and then not have all your things, not have anyone that you know, and then you stay somewhere else. Like, the level of trauma, the unnecessary trauma that was inflicted on these kids in the middle of the night. Um, I, I think some people are like, well, you know what? Maybe some of these, if you have folks who are a little bit skeptical, don't know how the system works, how the process that you're talking about works, might say, well, these are Guatemalan children. If the government wanted them back, they should go back. And I think we've talked about just how unsensible it is that in the middle of the night and without notice, you're doing that kind of under the cover of darkness. It's highly kind of suspicious. If you're really doing a quality repatriation of people, and you're not doing that in the middle of the night and without notice and under the cover of darkness, it doesn't feel right. And so what would you say to someone who was like, well, we can't take everybody, we can't take all these children, and also if the government wants them back, they should go back. What would you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, remember too what asylum is, right? When somebody asks for asylum in the United States, what they're saying is, my government is unwilling or unable to protect me, right? And so if you have a child who has been harmed by a family member and there's no government, there's no child protection service has helped the child. Maybe there's gangs in the country of origin that are trying to target, recruit this child, and the government doesn't have full control over them. It's not because the Guatemalan government officials don't want to. Maybe they don't have the resources or the tools that they need to be able to do this. Asylum is, my government is unable or unwilling to protect me. So for the government to say, I want you back, the United States has to make its own determination that they would send this person back to a place but they have to first ensure that the government is willing and able to protect that child. Now, again, I'm not making any comments about the veracity of these kids' claims, other than we need to figure out, is that true? Are we sending them back to a place where the government really can't protect them from further harm? And are we just delivering children via airplanes to harmful situations? I don't think anyone thinks that's a good idea. I think the question of, can we take everyone? Immigration law and asking for humanitarian protection is really tough. It is not easier just because you're a kid. You have to meet the same standards as any adult does, which is why it's so important for kids to have lawyers to help them through this, help them explain it. So it is a tough process to get protection here in the United States. It's not just kind of an open door policy, but again, it's all about, how are we going through this process? How do we really make sure that we're checking before we send anybody back to harm?
Sure. And part of that process, part of that checking to ensure that kids are not being sent back to exploitive situations, is legal representation. Can you talk a little bit about, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I do think it's relevant to the question of, well, what is happening with the kids now? Overall, we have seen drastic kind of extreme swings back and forth about the allocation of funding for kids who are here unaccompanied. And we do have anti-trafficking and exploitation laws that say that each child who's here unaccompanied should have legal representation, and yet that is not the case. And there has been kind of a tug of war about the funding and the allocation of of that basic protection and right for children. Can you tell us where that sits right now in terms of how many of these kids do have access to legal representation that can help them navigate an adult immigration court process?
Yeah, less than half the kids from our best count have a lawyer helping them through this process. Now, I mean, I'm a lawyer, so I'm a little biased, but if I ever saw the importance of a lawyer's role, it was this weekend. The work that these lawyers did, talking to people, physically going to facilities in the middle of the night, printing out the restraining order and explaining to shelter staff what that meant, trying to get kids off of buses who are being driven to the airports. I mean, if there's ever been a time where it's, you can kind of really viscerally understand the importance of a kid having an advocate, it was this weekend. It was just so humbling and remarkable to see what these lawyers did. But, the Congress has appropriated money every year so that ORR can make sure that these kids have lawyers every year, no matter who's in charge of the budget process, whether it's Republicans, whether it's Democrats. And the amount of money Congress has appropriated for this purpose has increased over the years because, again, it's just this basic fundamental concept of fairness. You can't have a kid go through an immigration court process, an adult process, without some advocate or someone helping them explain it. So Congress has been very clear. They want kids to have lawyers. They've asked for money, the governments, the administrations, to make sure that they have contracts and kids are provided with lawyers. Over the past 9 months, there was the legal services contract was terminated. There were two. Both were terminated. One was brought back online. It's the amount of time that it's for has shortened. And so there's a lot of worry that there may not be a commitment to ensure that they continue the legal services contract to make sure that kids have lawyers. Now, again, it's still less than half the kids even have a lawyer. But Congress has been pretty clear about that they think that it is important. And they have been very bipartisan, kind of lockstep on this, making sure that at least kids have lawyers. And we're worried about what's going to happen with the future of this and that kids are going to have access to somebody to help them through the process.
Yeah, I think it's something that everybody agrees on. The most vulnerable, especially in U.S. care, deserve and need representation so that they're not sent back to exploitive situations in danger and persecution. So tell us so all of this was halted this weekend. What is kind of the future for these kids? What is happening with these kids now? And then I'm going to ask you what you think that we can do to actually step in any way and help or support the situation. So what's happening now with these kids that were all just kind of shuffled back into places back in the US?
Yeah, well, so the litigation's ongoing. This was just a very temporary pause. So over the next few days, there's going to be more briefs by each side. The government and the plaintiffs are going to be briefing the court on the process, what they think happened, and what their concerns are. And then there will be a decision about whether these removals can move forward or not. Now, the government of the United States and Honduras have just they have also signed a diplomatic note about returning children as well. So there's a lot of concern that we're going to see the same thing happen with Honduran children, either this weekend or next week. So you can only imagine the anxiety. You can imagine the anxiety in these shelters right now, kind of the kids looking at each other like, who's next? Am I going to be woken up in the middle of the night? And this is how lawyers are feeling. When am I going to, get a call and have to go down to a shelter in the middle of the night, figure out what's going on? So there's a very high anxiety about this happening, not just to Guatemalan children, that this would move forward, but also Honduran children, and we don't know where would be next. Again, we want to make sure that there is a process, that they just let the kids go through the process that was created by Congress and has stood the test of time over all these years. Let's make sure that we're resourcing the system so we can get to the bottom of the story. So what's going to happen next? I mean, your guess is as good as mine. We're all on heightened alert. I have my work phone with me at all times because it's like you don't know when the other shoe's going to drop. I think for what's next, I'm so grateful to you and your community for asking questions. It's, we're bombarded with so much information. It's hard to know what's true and what's not. What we're trying to do here at Kind is tell the story and explain what we're hearing, just to give some factual, make sure that there's some facts out in the conversation and dialogue. So I think it's real important for people to keep asking questions, not just take something at face value. Ask questions. Why was it in the middle of the night? If this really was lawful and a healthy process, why are you doing it in the middle of the night over a long weekend? Right. And so, really pushing, making sure, asking the right questions. I think, Kind will be continuing to put out information on our website, our supporters. We will certainly share with Women of Welcome any opportunities to advocate with the administration, ask them, please don't do anything without allowing children a full process. Don't take any actions until children can have a full process. And calling your members of Congress and saying, just like during zero tolerance and family separation many years ago, it was the rage of the American public that said, not on our watch, you're not going to take babies from their mothers on our watch. That doesn't mean we're going to open our borders, but we're not going to take babies from their mothers, right? And the same thing, we're not asking for every single child to automatically just come and stay in the United States of America. That's not tenable. What we're asking for is allow the processes to work out and make sure they're resourced. Make sure it's not, a farce. You really have a process where the kid has a lawyer, there's a judge that scrutinizes the case. You're making sure there's no trafficking or exploitation concerns so that children can be safe and integrated into a community permanently.
Right, right. And I think so many people do have questions about the process. There have been over the last, several years, just all kinds of questions that Kind and Women of Welcome have put out loads of resources on. I see some of the questions about the process in the chat here, about missing kids, about all of these things. That is a conversation for another time, but it also is fully explained, and resources are given on Kind's website as well as Women of Welcome in our social feed on Instagram or Facebook. So if you're looking for some of that information, those are great questions, and those have been answered, I think, well on both sides here. So just want to encourage you to stay in touch, stay in tune. And Jen, thank you so much just for the work that you do. And thank you for enlightening us about what happened this weekend and the probability of it maybe even happening in the future if we don't use our voice to speak up for these kids. When, as Christians, when we hear about vulnerable people, our hearts are and should be moved and motivated to speak up and also to do something. And there is something that we can do. We drastically underestimate what the power of prayer can do. We drastically underestimate what a call to our congressional leaders who have decision-making authority and a budget appropriation authority can do when they hear that Christian men and women care around this country about vulnerable kids and the treatment and the process that they're put through. So, Jen, thank you so much. I would highly encourage you to follow Kind. I would highly encourage you to follow the Acacia Center for Justice. I would also highly encourage you to just stay in touch with Women of Welcome, and we'll give you more information as we have it. So thank you so much, Jen. Appreciate
thanks for your compassion and curiosity.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye.